For as long as Chinese civilization has existed, the Yangtze River has been trying to erase it. The longest river in Asia, 3,900 miles of glacial meltwater, monsoon fury, and unstoppable sediment pouring from the Tibetan Plateau to the East China Sea, has been drowning, starving, and displacing human populations along its banks for millennia, with a regularity that borders on the mechanical. In 1931, the Yangtze combined with the Huai and Yellow Rivers to unleash the single deadliest flood in modern human history, a wall of brown water that consumed an area the size of England, killed an estimated 3 million people through drowning, famine, and cholera, and left 50 million homeless. In 1954, it flooded again. 30,000 more dead. In 1998, again, 3,000 more. Century after century, dynasty after dynasty, the Yangtze took what it wanted and retreated, leaving entire civilizations to count their dead and rebuild on the same cursed floodplains. Logic, survival instinct, and the accumulated weight of 100 generations of grief all point to one rational conclusion. You cannot tame this river. You can divert it, channel it, sacrifice farmland to absorb its wrath. But you do not cage the longest, most powerful waterway on a continent. The cost, in concrete, in capital, in the displacement of millions of living human beings, would be obscene beyond any conceivable return. Yet in 1992, the Chinese Communist Party did what every dynasty before it had fantasized about, and none had dared attempt. The National People's Congress approved the construction of a dam so monstrously large that it would physically alter the rotational dynamics of the planet Earth. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. NASA would later calculate that the redistribution of 39 billion tons of water to an elevation of 175 meters above sea level would increase the Earth's moment of inertia enough to slow the planet's rotation by 0.06 microseconds per day and shift its rotational pole by 2 centimeters. Humanity built a structure so massive it changed how fast the Earth spins. The arrogance is not figurative, it is gravitational. This is the story of how the People's Republic of China declared war on the most lethal river system in Asia, spent $37 billion, displaced over 1.3 million people, drowned 13 cities, and erected the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric power station on Earth, discovering that when you cage a dragon of this magnitude, the cage becomes a prison for everyone. Before the dam existed, the Three Gorges region of the Yangtze was one of the most savagely beautiful and treacherous landscapes on the planet. The river, swollen with monsoon rainfall and snowmelt, squeezed through 3 narrow limestone gorges, Kutang, Wu, and Ziling, where canyon walls rose vertically over 1,000 feet above the churning water. The current accelerated through these natural choke points with murderous velocity, creating whirlpools and undertows that had been swallowing boats and drowning sailors since the Han Dynasty. The surrounding geology was a fractured, unstable lattice of limestone, sandstone, and shale. Rock formations prone to catastrophic landslides triggered by rainfall, seismic activity, or simply the slow, grinding erosion of time. The climate alternated between suffocating subtropical humidity and violent monsoon deluges that dumped over 50 inches of rain annually. The river carried an average of 500 million tons of sediment per year, a relentless, grinding payload of silt and clay that choked navigation channels, buried infrastructure, and made the Yangtze's bed an ever-shifting geological weapon. This was not a river that invited construction. It was a river that punished the very concept. The desperation that drove the dam's construction was existential, ancient, and politically explosive. The Yangtze Basin is home to over 400 million people, roughly 1/3 of China's entire population, and its floodplain produces a staggering percentage of the nation's agricultural output and industrial capacity. Every catastrophic flood threatened not just lives, but the political legitimacy of whatever government sat in Beijing. Sun Yat-sen first proposed damming the Yangtze in 1919. Mao Zedong wrote poetry about it. The nationalist government brought in American engineers from the Bureau of Reclamation in 1944 to survey the site. But wars, revolutions, and economic catastrophes delayed the project for 70 years. When the floods of 1998 killed over 3,000 people and displaced 200 million, the political equation became absolute. Build the dam, or admit that the Communist Party cannot protect its own people from a river. The weapon they designed to cage the Yangtze was a concrete gravity dam of dimensions that defy human-scale comprehension. The dam body stretches 2,335 meters across the river, over 1.4 miles of solid concrete standing 185 meters tall. 115 meters thick at its base, tapering to 40 meters at the crest. It was engineered not to resist the river, but to absorb it, to physically contain the Yangtze's fury through sheer gravitational mass, like dropping a continent-sized concrete fist onto the throat of the most dangerous waterway in Asia. Behind it, the reservoir stretches 660 kilometers upstream, over 400 miles of drowned river valley, submerging everything in its path. The statistics do not simply impress, they rupture comprehension. Workers poured 27.2 million cubic meters of concrete, enough to build a 3-foot-wide sidewalk stretching from the Earth to the Moon. They consumed 463,000 tons of steel. More than 60 Eiffel Towers melted and reformed into reinforcement. They excavated over 102 million cubic meters of earth and rock, a volume sufficient to fill 40 Great Pyramids of Giza. The reservoir behind the dam holds 39.3 cubic kilometers of water, a synthetic inland sea covering over 1,000 square kilometers. 32 turbine generators produce 22,500 megawatts of installed capacity, making the Three Gorges the most powerful single power station on the face of the planet. The total cost exceeded $37 billion, a sum larger than the annual GDP of over half the nations on Earth. The initial construction was a display of industrial force that even by Chinese mega-infrastructure standards bordered on the hallucinatory. Beginning in December 1994, a peak workforce of over 26,000 laborers attacked the gorge simultaneously. The Yangtze was temporarily diverted through massive concrete channels while workers blasted, excavated, and poured the dam wall in continuous operations. Cofferdams held back the river's fury as the concrete rose higher, month after month, year after year. By 2003, the reservoir began filling. By 2006, the main dam body was complete. By 2012, all 32 turbines were operational. For a shining, triumphant moment, it appeared that the Chinese state had achieved what Sun Yat-sen could only dream of, the total subjugation of the Yangtze River. Then the consequences detonated. The human cost was staggering, not in construction deaths, but in the systematic erasure of an entire civilization from the map. Over 1.3 million people were forcibly relocated as the reservoir swallowed 13 cities, 140 towns, and over 1,300 villages. Farmers who had worked the same terraced land for generations were uprooted and resettled into unfamiliar urban environments with inadequate compensation and no arable land. Ancient archaeological sites dating back to the Paleolithic era, thousands of years of Chinese cultural history, vanished beneath the rising water. The Zhangfei Temple was dismantled brick by brick and reconstructed at higher elevation. Countless other irreplaceable sites simply drowned. And the ecological devastation was equally catastrophic. The dam severed the Yangtze's natural sediment flow, trapping hundreds of millions of tons of silt behind the wall, starving the downstream delta of the material it needs to sustain itself. The Yangtze Delta has now shifted from expansion to active erosion, literally shrinking into the sea. The endangered Chinese sturgeon and the baiji, the Yangtze River dolphin, were driven to functional extinction. The reservoir's slowed waters became a stagnant trap for industrial pollution and algae blooms, degrading the water quality for the millions who depend on it downstream. And the sheer weight of 39 billion tons of impounded water has triggered a documented increase in landslides and reservoir-induced seismicity in the surrounding region. The dam is literally shaking the geology it was built upon. Jump to the present. The Three Gorges Dam operates. It generates enough electricity to power a mid-sized European nation. It held back devastating floods in 2020, absorbing inflows that would have overwhelmed the downstream cities of Wuhan and Nanjing. State media reported slight deformation in the dam wall during that crisis, described officially as an elastic response within design parameters. The world largely shrugged, but the invisible war between the dam and the river has entered a new, more insidious phase. Sedimentation continues to accumulate behind the wall, slowly reducing the reservoir's capacity and threatening long-term operational viability. The downstream Yangtze, starved of its natural sediment, is eroding its own banks and delta at an accelerating rate. Landslides along the 660-kilometer reservoir shoreline remain a persistent threat to the communities that were resettled along its edges. Climate variability is intensifying monsoon extremes, cycling between catastrophic floods and severe droughts that limit the dam's hydroelectric output. And the fundamental structural reality remains. This is a concrete wall, 1.4 miles long, holding back a synthetic ocean 400 miles long, in a seismically active zone, surrounded by unstable geology. The engineering is extraordinary. The margin for error is zero. The paradox is devastating. To the state planners and energy executives reviewing power output data, the Three Gorges Dam is a triumph, the crown jewel of Chinese infrastructure, a symbol of national capability and modernization. To the displaced farmer staring at an apartment block where her ancestral village used to be, to the ecologist watching the last Chinese sturgeon struggle against a wall it can never pass, to the geologist monitoring micro-tremors in the rock beneath the reservoir, the dam is something far more complicated. A wound of planetary scale, carved into the living body of a river that has been running since before human beings existed. Monumental engineering of this magnitude is not mastery. It is the most expensive form of negotiation ever conceived, a temporary arrangement with geological forces that have been shaping continents for hundreds of millions of years. They caged the deadliest river in Asia. They poured enough concrete to reach the moon. They moved enough water to alter the spin of the Earth itself. And every single day, the sediment rises a little higher behind the wall. The downstream banks erode a little deeper, and the geology beneath the reservoir shifts by increments too small to feel but too large to ignore. Because sometimes, buried inside the most powerful structure humanity has ever erected, there is a quiet, enormous, terrifying truth. A truth about the distance between building something so massive, it changes how the planet rotates, the 1.3 million lives that were uprooted to make room for it, and the ancient, patient, undefeated river pressing against the concrete, waiting, as it has waited for millennia, for the wall to blink first.